Welcome back. Today, we are going to be talking about how to summarize data, and specifically, we're going to be talking about measures of location or measures of central tendency as they're often described. There are four that we're going to look at today: mean, median, mode, and midrange. There are many, many other measures of central tendency or measures of location, but these are the four that we're going to be focusing on today. Before we go any further, we should talk about what we mean by measures of location or central tendency. In general, we're interested in what a typical value is, and I'll talk about this more in different videos. But essentially, if someone asks you uh, what the average temperature is in a particular region, say, they're not asking precisely for a mathematical calculation. What they're wanting to know is, what is a typical value? If I go to, say, Toronto, Ontario, what in July, when they ask you what's the average temperature, what they're really saying is, what can I typically expect? What is the temperature that is most likely to occur? That's sort of the general idea of measures of central tendency. And there are many, many, many different ways of measuring that, which, as I say, in subsequent videos, I will talk about why we might want to use different measures for different purposes. In this video, though, I'm just going to describe these measures and also give you some examples of how we might use them. So mean, median, mode, and range. They are the most common ones, um, and they're generally good for continuous data. The first one we'll talk about is mean, and the mean is, generally speaking, what people mean when they talk about an average. If they're talking about an average number, they're really talking about the mean. And here's the calculation for it on the screen. We look at all of the data points, we add all of them up, and then we divide by the number of data points. Essentially what many people know as taking an average. So a mean is really just the arithmetic average, but it's not the only measure that we have. As with many things in mathematics, it's probably easiest if we start by looking at an example. An example will help us build tuition and give us an idea of how these various measures fit together. So we have mean, we have median, which is sort of the central value. In other words, if we have a string of numbers and we order them from smallest to largest, the median is the value that is in the very, very center of that. Mode is the most frequently occurring number. If you have a set of numbers, the number that appears most frequently, that is the mode. Now, attentive listeners will right away think, yes, but what if it's very detailed data and I have numbers 8.732 and 5.2891? Some of those numbers may never repeat, and you're quite correct. It is quite possible for a data set to have no mode or to have many modes. And the final is mid-range, and I'll describe what that is. Essentially, you take the maximum number, the largest value of a string of numbers, you take the smallest value of a string of numbers, and then you look at the difference between those two and what is the midpoint between those. So if your largest number is 20 and your smallest number is 18, then the mid-range value is 19. It's exactly halfway between those two numbers. Well, as I say, as with many things in mathematics, it's probably easiest if we go through an example to help build our intuition for what this is. So that's what we're going to do now. And I have a small set of numbers here. Just 11 observations, and there are numbers going as low as 4 and as high as 10. And this is for a variable that we'll call x. So recall the calculation that I showed you for calculating the mean or the average. That is the one that we're going to do first. So again, the way that we do that is we add up all of the values. So we take the sum of all of those values, and then we divide it by the number of observations that we have. So in our case, we're going to be adding up all of those x values and dividing them by 11, which is the number of observations that we have. So let's go ahead and do that. And we'll do this step by step so you really get the idea. So what we see here is 8 plus 7 is 15, plus 5 is 20, plus 10 is 30, 37, 41, 48, 58, 63, 69, and 77, I think. Of course, we could just use the built-in functionality within Excel to do this. So it does add up to 77, and I will just label it so that we know what that is. We also see that our n is 9, or 11 rather. There are 11 observations. And so now to calculate our average or our mean, we just take the sum and divide it by 11. And so we see our mean for this range of data, or this set of observations that we have, is 7. You may ask yourself why I'm using Excel to show you this. Excel is actually a very underrated tool for data analysis. I would say probably 80 to 85% of the data analysis, maybe even more, that goes on using Excel. And it's a very useful tool for building intuition, for getting the general idea of some of these notions. Well, the next thing we want to look at is the median. And so you'll recall that with a median, we look at all of the values, we order them from smallest to largest, and then we choose what the middle value is. So I'm just going to rewrite these values over here. We'll put it right beside it, and we'll order them from smallest to largest. Those are an awful lot of decimal places. Let's get rid of those. There we go. So let's just sort all of these. Smallest to largest. And so we see our smallest value is 4 and our largest value is 10. So we just count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 7. 7 is our median. So if we look at all of the data, 7 is the number that is right in the middle. Now you'll notice in this case that the mean and the median are exactly the same. That is not always the case, and it need not be that way. But in this case, it actually is. Mode. Mode is the most frequently occurring value. And again, in our data, it's easy to see we have only one occurrence of 4, 5 occurs twice, 6 occurs once, 7 occurs 3 times, 8 occurs twice, 10 occurs twice. So our mode is 7. This is somewhat unusual in data, to have a mean, a median, and mode that are all the same. But nevertheless, that is what this data looks. And what it tells us is that this data is, roughly speaking, symmetrical. We'll talk about that later. Perhaps in a subsequent video, I'll talk about how mean, median, and mode can all work together to give us a very, very good idea of what a particular data set looks like of without even looking at all of the particulars and all of the data. Now, an important thing to remember as well is right now we have reduced 11 observations down to 3 numbers that give us a relatively good summary of this information, of a typical value. The final thing that I mentioned was midrange. Let's make that a little bit larger. And midrange is again the difference between the largest value and the smallest value. So let's move this down actually, and we'll say the minimum of all of these numbers is 4, and the maximum value of our data is 10. The difference, of course, between those, is 6. So 10 minus 4 is 6. And mid-range is going to be that sort of midpoint between 10 and 4. And so halfway between 10 and 4, that actually works out to be 7 as well. And so we have mean, median, mode, and mid-range are all 7. So this gives us pretty good evidence that for this data set anyway, a typical value is going to be 7. Well, that will be all for this particular video. Make sure you tune in to subsequent videos when we'll start comparing mean, median, and mode, and I'll show you how that and mid-range and how that can really help us describe data really, really well. Hope this has been helpful. Thank you as always for your kind attention. If you found this valuable, I'd invite you to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any updates. Thanks, and hope to see you next time.